Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Cropper here. I thought we could say a few more words about abstractions. I recently did a video called Abstractions Don't Exist, and I should, if I can remember, post this as a response to that video. And so that was confusing to some people and a revelation for some people, and somebody said, well, abstractions can be said to be ideas which do exist. Now, I admit that ideas in some sense you could say exist, but my point is they don't exist in any real sense. They are in your head. Like I said at the end of that video, they're in your head. They're very useful, but they're in your head. Alright, let's figure out then what is an abstraction, and then we're going to look at the fact that abstractions are what we live our lives for. They are the most important thing in the world to us as humans. They are the purpose of our life, and yet they don't have any actual concrete reality. They're only in your head. An abstraction, okay, is a group of things that you find in reality. We're going to start at the base. You find some things in reality, and you point out what's similar amongst them. You can be silly, and you can come up with concepts that have no use, right? So like you say, Jesus and cigar wrapper and your Aunt Kate at family barbecues. They all encircle you. Jesus encircles you because he loves you. Cigar wrappers encircle a cigar, and your Aunt Kate always hugs you. So what's the concept we're going to get? This is an example that Leonard Peikoff gives, that a schizophrenic had come up with a concept of his own for encirclement. And the schizophrenic had Jesus and the cigar wrapper, but the Aunt Kate thing I threw in there. At any rate, that would be a ridiculous one. Here's a better one. You look at, in reality, you've got physical evidence here of a spark jumping from a piece of amber to your finger, or from one person to another when they're hooked up to this little sparky-makey thing. Benjamin Franklin here, some of you may realize we're talking about. And then you realize that when you put the kite up in the air and it's got a silk string, and electricity comes down and charges the Leyden jar, and then you can get a spark out of the Leyden jar. So the lightning in the sky is a big form of electricity. Is a big form of whatever this little spark thing is. That's taking two separate instances in reality, and calling it the same, electricity. You couldn't call Jesus and the cigar band and Aunt Kate all wrappers, because they all wrap things, they encircle them. You couldn't call them encirclers, it would be no good. But you could call the shock that you get when you walk across the floor and then touch the door, with your feet on the carpet, rubbing them, and then you get a shock. And lightning burning down a house, you could call both of those instances of electricity, and you would be speaking very truthfully. You can take two instances within reality, let's say an apple falling and the moon never falling. And if you're really smart as Newton was, you'll be able to figure out what's similar between those, and that they are both instances of gravitation. So that is what an abstraction is. It's our name for the similarities between things in reality. Now here's the fun thing. Once you've got those set up, once you've got a bunch of similarities in reality set up, so you've basically organized reality into some subfolders. There's all the things you know about, but you're going to organize them down into a set. For example, I don't have to keep in my mind all these books that I have up here. I can just keep in my mind that I have X number of books, or a hell of a lot of books or something. You may not have noticed I changed the library. I used to video from the other side, now I'm from this side because the street noise is less. And you wouldn't notice unless you knew my books quite well, because I've got back-to-back on both sides. Somebody said I green screen my library in. Okay, back to abstractions. If you've got your abstractions set up, you've got reality basically subcategorized into a few different folders. You say, I know about my books, I know how they act, I know about pancakes when my mom makes pancakes, I know how they act, Then you can start adding those things together. For example, you know about the pancakes. You know about cereal. You know about meatloaf. Now you've got the concept food. Stuff that you eat, right? That's just a sloppy definition, but you can get off on that definition if you want. So now you've got food as an abstraction. Does food exist? No. Food does not exist. The only thing that really exists is carrots and peas and Captain Crunch cereal and milk and peanut butter. That's what exists. There is no such thing as food. There are only individual instances of it. So food is a category in our mind. Now, someone said an idea is real. Now, an idea is only real in the sense that it can be brought down to these five senses, that it can be brought down to reality, that it can be brought down, reduced, as Ayn Rand says, or concretized, as I like to say, as Ayn Rand said. To concretize an abstraction means to bring it down to the things in reality that it points to. Now, sometimes there's more steps than one. I said, we've started out, we've got everything subdivided, now we've got some abstractions. Let's go from there. What can we do with the abstractions we've got now? Let's say we look at a whole bunch of things where there's people hitting each other. And the abstraction we get from that, because they're each from different cities, and the cities are fighting over land in the center, the abstraction we get from that is we call it war. Wars don't really exist. What exists is bullets and soldiers and guns. And shooting and death and blood. Wars themselves are in the minds of the people who are involved. If an ape looked at it, a monkey or something, it would just see violence and people running and noise. It wouldn't see two nations and the struggle between them in a geopolitical thing that stretches out over generations. It wouldn't see that. That's war, but war doesn't really exist. It's an abstraction in our head that comes from true concretes in reality. So in a certain sense, you can say that these ideas like war do exist, and they only exist if you can bring them down to those things in reality which you got them from. So that's why I like to ask people to explain what they mean when it sounds like they're talking nonsense. Your mind concretizes automatically when you're listening to people, unless you're trained against it, which a lot of people are trained against it in schools now. But if you properly have trained yourself, if you've taught yourself to think, or amazingly had a good school, which is not likely, if you've taught yourself to think, then as you listen to somebody, you always are making examples of what they say. And if you don't get an example, if what they say couldn't be made into an example, it's not that it comes to you in that language, but I understand it in that language because I have studied epistemology. Interesting subject. In your mind, if you don't know epistemology and stuff, you don't say, now wait a minute, give me a concrete example. You just say, what do you mean? And the only way he can explain what he means is to break it further down towards the five senses. Now we can go up from the five senses. We've got war, which is bullets and men and people shooting each other. And then you go to this dusty old marble building in one of the cities of the two nations that are fighting. Let's go to this city, and there's this dusty old marble building, and inside of it is these fat men with top hats and cigars. No, I'm just trying to give you a picture of a politician. These men and women engaged in what seem to be boring activities, but what they do there, the talking that goes on and paper shuffling and stuff, what they do there determines what the soldiers do out there in the field. So now we have, what are we going to call these people walking around in this government building? What is government? That's another abstraction. Well, eventually we can get to politics. Politics is people telling other people to do things for the state. That's politics. We can move from there. We've got politics. Now let's look at scientists mixing stuff together in a laboratory. And that's nothing but this material and that material going together in a certain order, and certain things happen. There's no such thing as chemistry. There's only chemicals and scientists putting them together. So now we have chemistry. We have politics and we have chemistry. But how do the scientists know what to do in chemistry? So you look at chemistry, and you look at medicine, and you look at physics, and then you come up with this idea of induction. Because look, here's what they did in physics to get the truth. Here's what they did in chemistry to get the truth. Here's what they did in whatever else to get the medicine to get the truth. So you have the idea of induction now. So you've got induction, you've got politics, we can get ethics if we look at how